Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. Today we're going over a couple of smaller cards that I've noticed trending recently. With a couple of these things, they're cards that we've talked about in the past and I have mentioned that they might be worth looking at while they were cheaper. But now that they've gone up, I do want to make sure that we're all aware of them moving forward. We don't want to just identify the opportunities, we also want to make note of when these spikes actually do happen, because a lot of the time, that's a good chance for you guys to offload the cards that you've invested in and secure some of those profits. Let's get started. So to start things off, we're going to go over a couple of cards related to Fire Kings because that is the structure deck that just came out this week. The Fire Kings are one of the best decks over in the OCG, and even though we aren't getting Populous and Promethean Princess until Phantom Nightmare comes out in early 2024, I know a lot of players are preparing by learning the decks and combos now, so players are looking to pick the cards up early. The first thing we want to note is Wanted, Seeker of Sinful Spoils, the quick play spell card that searches for a Dia Bellstar out of the deck. As we've seen with Rescue Ace, this is a really strong engine that gets you the spell that summons any level 1 fire out of the deck, and with Fire Kings having a new card called Ponix being a level 1 fire monster, it should be no surprise that the Sinful Spoil engine is one of the best ones to combine with Fire Kings. That said, the Sinful Spoil cards were already expensive because the engine makes Rescue Ace a top tier deck as well, so that's two huge meta threats that are making use of the Sinful Spoils engine. And even though we don't have anything more than locals or anything to validate the strength of the Fire King deck yet, everyone is really expecting Sinful Spoils Fire King to be the best variant. That said, Wanted has shot up over the last day or two. Just yesterday, this card was down at the $80 to $85 mark, but with a ton of copies moving yesterday, the card now sits at $100 lowest on TCG Player. Now, to be honest, the card is only going to get better from here. Even aside from the Fire Kings and Rescue Ace, the Snake Eye and Sinful Spoil cards are part of the next set of lore, kind of like what happened with Fallen of Albaz and Visa Starfrost, so we should probably expect all of these cards to get more support and continue to see meta usage throughout 2024 anyways. It is a lot to spend on an engine, and hopefully you were able to pick up these cards before while they were a bit cheaper, but really aside from a slight decline because of players listing their copies back up immediately after the price spike, I don't see this card becoming that much more affordable anytime soon. Up next is a card that we've talked about just a couple of weeks ago. It's Dogmatica Maximus. So this card has a couple of different decks that are able to use it. The first one is Fire Kings, which doesn't really use their extra deck all that much, so they can run a pretty compact Dogmatica engine with an Nadir Servant and Maximus, dumping extra deck monsters to the graveyard and triggering their effects. The other one is the Silent Force archetype coming out after Phantom Nightmare, which basically uses it for the exact same thing, but they also have access to Herald of the Arclight to search for ritual cards. Basically, while this card is on the field, both you and your opponent send 2 extra deck monsters from the extra deck straight to the graveyard. Now theoretically you can send your own like Gura and Entis and get to benefit from their effects, while you also get rid of your opponent's extra deck pieces or put them in a tough position if they have really tight extra decks. Of course, in the mirror match, or if the meta evolves to where players are expecting this might end up just being a bad play, but it will depend on how the format evolves. I believe that the last time we looked at this card, the secrets were about $10, but I recommended picking up the Ultras as a budget alternative for only $1. Hopefully you guys managed to grab some back then, because since then we've seen the secret rares go up to between $25 and $30, while the Ultras are now sitting at a solid $5 each. Of course, what happens with this card is going to depend on the format and what people expect to be the best deck. I remember when a lot of people were on Dogmatica Invoked, this card was just not that great because people would tech their extra decks with cards to punish your opponent for resolving it. Now, I guess it might be more interesting since not that many players are expecting it early on, but we will have to wait and see. Also worth noting is that Nadir Servant and Ecclesia both just got reprinted in Rarity Collection, so even though those cards, which you're more likely to run 3 of, would seem like more standard buyout targets, everyone turned to Maximus instead as the missing piece. But yeah, since it really is just a one of, and since Dogmatica Fire King isn't really that great of a variant of the deck, I don't see this card as a hold. Keep 1 copy for yourself to use just in case it does become like really solid, but definitely just offload the rest while everyone is hyping up the card going into next format. So here's a card that we haven't looked at in quite a while. It's Brigade Shurg, the Ominous Omen. This card is a Link 4 monster that you need to use Beast family monsters to make. Fortunately, the Brigade cards make this a bit easier to bring out. This card has 2 really useful effects. On summon, it banishes any card on the field, and then if it's sent to the graveyard, you can basically search for a Beast family monster whose level is less than or equal to the number of banished Beast family monsters you have. The Tri-Brigade engine is honestly something that hasn't really seen play for the last couple of years. I think some players have tried to make it work every now and then, but the engine just really lacks power compared to all of the other decks that we have in the game today. However, it does have going for it the fact that the engine is really affordable and budget friendly, and it can be combined with Fire Kings to make a semi-competitive strategy. It's definitely not the best variant by any means, but with 3 Fire King decks and an engine that realistically probably only costs you $20 to $30, Tri-Brigade Fire Kings might be a fun deck for players at your locals to try out. Shurg is a pretty key part of the Tri-Brigade engine that a lot of players will actually use 2 copies of. It can be a combo piece on your turn since you can summon it and then link it off and search for another combo piece, but then you also want to have a copy in your extra deck to summon with Tri-Brigade Revolt on your opponent's turn to banish one of their cards as well. With Shurg, the jump may seem small dollar-wise, but percentage-wise it's pretty notable. The secrets have gone from being around $4 or $5 to now being $9, while the ultras have gone from basically being like 50 cents to now being $2 a piece. I don't really think that Tri-Brigade Fire King is a deck that you guys should be scared of necessarily, and the Tri-Brigade cards are pretty outclassed at this point, but the Tri-Brigade engine is probably one of the more forgotten about ones over the last couple of years, so it might be worth bringing some of those cards to your locals to see if you can trade them with someone who's wanting to pick it up and play it with Fire Kings and converting that into something a bit more relevant. This is a card I just want to touch on briefly. It's something that we've talked about a lot in the past. It's Gura, the Wings of Resonant Life. This is actually a really cool card in the format that we're about to be heading into. Now, on one hand, you can dump it with cards like Maximus and Nadir Servant, and it will let you draw a card for free. On the other hand, it's a really solid super polymerization target, since it can be made with any 2 monsters that have different names, but the same type and attribute. From there, you can deal a lot of damage with it since it does deal double battle damage, or even just link it off to draw an extra card. The reason I bring this card up is that I think we are going to see a lot more demand for it moving forward, even if you aren't playing the Dogmatica stuff yourself. As I mentioned when we were talking about Maximus, I think we could see players looking to add this to their extra deck if they are playing against a lot of Dogmatica Fire Kings at their locals, and honestly, that being a pretty cheap yet strong variant, I think that's something you should expect to play against more. Maybe not at like a YCS top cut or anything like that, but the field of decks that you expect to play against at your locals is obviously going to be very different than what you see at larger events. Of course, this is all assuming that the card doesn't just get randomly reprinted again. Like, yeah, maybe it'll get an OTS Super or Alti printing, or maybe we'll get it as a rare in a side set, right? But I don't really expect that to be the case quite yet. Now that said, right now the card is around $7 to $8 for either the original Ultra or the reprint Secret Rare. I definitely expect this card to hit $10 by the end of the year, and probably approaching $15 to $20 as we get closer to the release of the Silent Force archetype in Phantom Nightmare, which is coming out next February. There's always a degree of risk involved in investing in certain cards, but I do feel like Gura is a really good pickup right now with a lot of applications moving forward, and therefore a lot of upwards price potential. We've mentioned the Silent Force deck a couple of times in this video, but now we're actually going to talk about a ritual monster. It's Suravis the Ancient and Ascended. This is a really random secret rare, and I remember back in Invasion Vengeance, when that set came out, this was just like the worst secret rare to pull. You could pull cards like Totally Awesome or Dimensional Barrier, each of which were really expensive cards at the time, and sometimes you just end up pulling this instead and it was kind of depressing. Now, Suravis is actually a pretty interesting card. It's kind of like a counter hand trap as it negates something that targets one of your monsters, so basically it can negate an infinite impermanence or an effect failure and ensure that you can resolve one of your key effects. It is also a negate while it is on the field, where if your opponent would built-in summon a monster, you can return this card from the field back to your hand to negate the summon and banish that monster. Now, I'm not too familiar with the Silent Force deck. I do believe that they can use the new effect monster version of Suravis and bounce that card back and then summon Suravis directly out of the deck. I think that technically this could be used in Dogmatica Fire Kings as well. You could tech one in and search it with a copy of Herald of the Arclight that you dump, and then you have just a tech card that you can play around a Veiler or an Imperm if you have like a really key effect that you need to resolve. I don't know how great that is though. Now, even though Rescue Ace and Fire Kings are definitely the best decks over in the OCG right now, Silent Force is kind of right behind them, so I wouldn't be too surprised if they were a top tier threat after a couple of things get hit on the next ban list. Fortunately, Suravis did get a rare printing in Amazing Defenders, so it's really accessible if you just need a copy of the card. However, if you do want the holo printings, you're looking at like $15 to $17 for the secrets versus $3 for the ultra rare. Now, despite being one of the more annoying cards to pull for a little while there, this card has evolved into a pretty strong option in a really solid deck. It's a beautiful card in Secret Rare as well, so if you really want to max rarity this deck a couple months from now, you may as well just go ahead and grab them. Next up, this is a card that I think is a bit more under the radar right now. It's Chaos Archfiend. So this card is a level 8 synchro that requires the tuner to be a light and the non-tuner to be a dark monster. Apparently, this is a card that is being used in some Centurion extra decks as an option to break through the opponent's field. If something gets banished, this card gains attack points. It can attack all of your opponent's monsters once each, and then it can also banish monsters that it destroys by battle. Pretty interesting option here. Now, from what I've seen, I don't believe that they use this in all Centurion builds because it is a bit situational, but I've noticed it pop up in a couple of lists. The card came out back in Photon Hypernova, so it's not exactly new, but I think that most people wrote this off as being just another bulk ultra rare. However, we've actually seen quite a few copies moving off of TCG Player recently, so the card has gone from being like 50 cents to now being a couple of dollars each. Overall, this card does seem a bit gimmicky. I feel like there are other more consistently usable cards that I would rather have in my extra deck, but maybe it just depends on each person's particular playstyle. If you guys can, this is another card you should probably dig out of your holo bulk and just keep in your trade binder. At $1 or $2, I don't know if it's worth the effort of going out and selling, but if you do bring it to your locals and you have Centurion players there that are looking for this card, I would see if you can trade them for something that has a bit more concrete value. And finally, the last card here isn't really tied to any meta trends, but rather, it's a new card that was just revealed over in the OCG. We're looking at Underworld, Goddess of the Closed World. So this card is a Link 5 monster that requires 4 or more monsters to make. The big thing with this card is that you can Link summon it using your opponent's monster as a material. If you can get a Link 2 and then 2 other monsters out onto your side of the field, you can use any of your opponent's monsters as a Link material without affecting it with a card effect or anything like that, so it helps to get rid of really difficult things to deal with, things like Expertly Noir with a ton of materials, or just other cards that are difficult to deal with because they're unaffected or cannot be targeted by card effects. This card does have other abilities, but that is the main one that you're really concerned about if you are choosing to play Underworld Goddess. Now, the new card that came out in the OCG is actually just a baby Link 2 version of Underworld Goddess, where if you Link summon a Link 5 or higher monster with that as a material, you can also use an opponent's monster that it points to. So basically, I believe that if you use this new Link 2 monster and one other monster that you control, you can use 2 of your opponent's monsters to Link summon into Underworld Goddess instead of just 1. So technically, this card does enable Underworld Goddess and make it stronger, but I believe that the new card, which is called Moon of the Closed Sky, actually affects the monster with a card effect, so it isn't actually as good as when you just naturally use an opponent's monster with Underworld Goddess. But it's still a pretty cool card, and I can see it being a big help with breaking boards, especially if you were able to resolve something like a Dark Ruler no more. Anyways, Underworld Goddess is back up in price as a result of this card being revealed, with the original secrets from Blazing Vortex just over $10 each, while the reprint secrets from the tin are about $5. These two printings look basically the same, so I would definitely recommend just picking up a copy or 2 of the reprint secret to make sure that you have it in your extra deck binder for when the baby Underworld Goddess comes out. Alright everyone, that is all we have for today's episode. I know that the Fire King stuff isn't full power yet, but it's definitely proving to be one of the strongest structure decks that we've had in a while. I think it's something that'll be a big player going into next format, and it's affordable as well, so we want to be prepared for all the different variants of it and know how it affects both what we play against and how we play, as well as what cards we should be looking out for. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch, please make sure that you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Also, make sure you leave a comment in the comment section and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.